Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 35th anniversary of Nintendo Power panel. I'm Stefan Reese. I'm the executive director of the 501c3 nonprofit, the Interactive Art Collection. We put on, for the third year now, we put on exhibits in the museum next door. If you haven't seen the art of Nintendo Power this year, please do so. I suspect most of you probably already have, because I was screaming my head off telling you to come to our panel. To my left are three amazing people that all worked on Nintendo Power Magazine. We have just to my left here is Scott Douwes. He was a designer from how many years? 93 to 97. And then we have Gail Tilden, the editor-in-chief of the magazine. And on the far left, Kim Logan, the design manager for the last 10 years of Nintendo Power, right? So I thought we would start with who would like to take a stab at telling us what Nintendo Power Magazine is?
Well, I can tell you up through like 1998, but when we founded Nintendo Power, it was really Mr. Arakawa, who was the president of Nintendo of America. He really was focused on tools that help people to play games better so that they would appreciate the value of the game and they wouldn't get tired of buying them, or the parents wouldn't get tired. So that was something that we thought contributed to the prior downfall of the industry in the early 80s. And so that really was the mission of the magazine: show people what games are about, what they would like to buy, make sure they're happy with it, and all the idea behind things like maps and tips and tricks so that they would enjoy the games more. So the mission statement read something like, to increase customer satisfaction and extend the life of the category. So if you can imagine, we really didn't think that the category was going to be around 35 years later like it is today.
So curious, was there any thought to like a balance between extending the life of the category and like making a meaningful product, or like bringing joy to the reader, that kind of thing? Or because I think unfairly there's often this stigma about the magazine that it was purely to promote the product, right? And so was there thought to kind of that balance, and like how walk me through that?
Well, I think that the challenge of creating the product was, of course, people had to subscribe, be willing to pay. It had to be something interesting for the reader to enjoy and hopefully subscribe and renew. So it was truly a product that we wanted people to buy. In terms of the balance, you probably, if you were a subscriber, you know much about the magazine. There were things that were like for breathing room, whether it's like the Players Poll contest or a poster. So the idea that it couldn't just be wall to wall like a player's guide, but it needed a little bit of breathing room. And then we would kind of test that every year to see what people liked the most, what they liked the least, and make minor revisions all the way along the way. But yeah, it was a product in itself. It had to be good as a product.
I'd love to hear from all three of you. Gail, you just said that you obviously didn't think that the magazine would still be, or the category would be around 35 years later. Like, is there a defining moment in each of your careers where you understood that what you were doing was going to have an impact, or was having an impact?
No.
Yeah.
Next question.
No, I mean, for me, I was young when I got in there. I started when I was like 23, and it was my first real design job. So I was just stoked that I was working for Nintendo, doing some cool stuff and playing video games all day long. I didn't think it was gonna, have any impact at all. Really, I didn't really think about that.
No, I agree. I loved that I had a job playing video games, and seeing all this great art and meeting like Mr. Miyamoto and all these great game designers. But then when we talked about the numbers of people that subscribed, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was amazing.
Issue 1 was what, 3.6 scale?
Yeah, that was free, but we converted to like 1.3 million off that free issue, so that's huge.
Huge, right. I mean, that was just shocking to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know when we quit thinking that the industry would have another opportunity to fall apart, or that there would be so much of a glut. I think maybe throughout Super NES, I don't think by the time we were moving past Super NES to N64, I don't think that was really the thought. It was really like technology and the advances in the games and the way that you played. It was really just how fast that was moving and where was it going and what was keeping up. So.
I'd love to actually stop a second on art direction and talk a little bit about that. And because I think one of the charming things, especially early on, so maybe this is for Kim and Gail, the art direction felt, I don't want to say haphazard, but just like page to page, it could be wildly different, and it made it feel like, I know as a kid, it made me feel like this was a thing that me and my friends could have made, or it felt like a for kids by kids kind of feeling. Was that something intentional?
I don't know, maybe especially these guys could talk about how it was originally, it felt very organic when the Japanese artists were contributing a lot, and it was a lot of hand-done work, hand-done art, which I know is very nostalgic for people. But, as, first of all, desktop publishing, but as the digital age came, things became maybe, I don't know, is regimented a good word for, I don't know, the layouts were more consistently organized at a right angle.
Well, yes, but it was, like nowadays, everything's based off a brand. When I started, it wasn't based off of a brand. It was just, here's a game, have fun. So your idea of it was like a bunch of kids making a magazine, it's kind of like what it was, right? Every month we were handed a bunch of games to play and try to find all the secrets and figure out, what to write about it. And we just kind of leveraged the look and feel of the game for each layout. We weren't thinking of the magazine as a whole. I think when we started thinking about the magazine as a whole, when we started looking at like the breather areas, like Player's Pulse and all that kind of stuff, that, we started thinking of like, what's the brand in terms of that? But in terms of the game pages itself, it was just go crazy, do what you love to do, Yeah, nowadays, as a designer, I look back at those pages, I'm like, what were we thinking? There's just no through line through any of it, But it was fun, so that I'm happy I got that experience.
Yeah, when I started, which was 10 years after Gail had started, that's when we started to get digital images. That is when we started to think of it as a cohesive experience, where we had, where we tried to. Each article, we wanted to have its own experience in it, but then we wanted to have the fonts and the headlines and how we called things out to be consistent, so that you could expect when you got there, you would have this kind of experience, but you get to see all the art and all the fantastic screenshots. And it was a bit of it was a change, because before that we all had different headlines everywhere. Oh, headlines are fine, but like the mastheads are being different was great. But it was definitely a change, and I think that it made it a little bit more readable, but a little bit less organic.
Yeah, more, maybe, hopefully it made a person
Sort of
feel
brought
more
it together.
relaxed
Yeah.
when they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
having that.
And do you think that the change away from organic to a little bit more structure is like by virtue of it becoming a digital production? Like,
Yes.
like in that, like it really wasn't a good fit anymore for the medium?
Well, I think it in a way also brought the magazine up a little bit professionally wise. And it made it more readable because you're not startled by different kind of fonts or or the way that you're maybe displaying the art. And it just made it easier. I felt it made it easier to read for the readers. And they didn't have to fight against like, oh wow, I can't read that on that background, or well, I don't know where I'm going with that, so I won't say. I don't know where I'm going
That's
with
fine,
that.
just go.
But anyhow, I think it made it seem a little bit more professional, and I think that overall helped Nintendo Power to be as powerful as it became.
I think there's an assumption that like, at least this is what I've always thought, was that like the magazines went like polygonal when the games did. So like N64 or like for other publications like PlayStation 1, that kind of thing. Was that just chance that kind of the desktop publishing coincided with the like 3D era of games, or was that like 2D isn't retro yet, it's just old, right? Let's go all digital. I've always been curious if that was just happenstance or if that was like,
I think, I guess in general, all technology was marching forward, so it did coincidentally happen kind of at the same time. I think another thing, just keep in mind, like, you wouldn't choose not to use digital publishing to make something as labor intensive as Nintendo Power. Like, I don't know, making a map, give an example of something like that. It's, of course, you would not want to walk away from that because somehow you had lost the character of the magazine. Like Kim said, having those sophisticated tools didn't mean to make it less fun.
No.
It was
It
certainly.
was make it easier to access.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
We also, by the way, moved all of the art and publishing aspects to the US from Japan. Scott's company had moved maybe a little earlier than that, but from Japan, but all of the first group of issues, maybe first couple years, a lot of the work was done in Japan, all the way up to the film that went to the printer. And so that era of bringing it to the US and then digital era changed. Our systems were changing at the time.
was that like mostly like a cost-saving measure to bring sort of, when everything sort of went in-house? Was that just like mostly for cost, or was there like creative concessions too?
No, so very complicated structure, but our co-publisher, the person who was leading their group in the US, was told he would be moving back and reassigned in Japan. And I said to Mr. Arakawa that I did not want him to go back, that he was truly a partner in this. And then he said, Mr. Suboike, you please tell your company that we're no longer going to co-publish with them and you're going to bring your staff and work at Nintendo now. So go tell them that, and then we'll just do it like that. Like, he made it like that's just something you just
Is that just
do.
fine?
Yeah,
Like,
that's just fine.
You just tell them you're not working there anymore, it's
Yeah,
fine.
just tell them we're not doing it like that anymore. We'll just do it with V-Design and us. So we did. But it was not a cost, it actually cost more because we brought all that stuff in-house, but that's why.
So I'd love to shift gears a little bit, and there was a question that I've always wanted to ask you. And so, especially for the games industry at the time, I think that there's a striking number of women who were working on the magazine. And so two-part question. Is that something you did intentionally? And how do you feel that and also, do you agree with me? But also, how you feel like that impacted the product?
And so, okay, I'm first gonna say my daughter and her wife fielded that question with me last night, and they were really appalled that I didn't have an inspirational answer because it did not come into consideration for me because as a woman in working at Nintendo since 1983, I never thought that I wouldn't hire a qualified woman versus a man. Like, you're just interviewing people for a job and they are showing you their portfolio or creativity or, personality, what games they love. A lot of people came out of college and were in testing, customer service, game counseling, and they would apply for openings with Nintendo Power. So I also came from the marketing side, and at Nintendo, maybe not in the game development side, maybe not in the treehouse, hard to say, but in the administrative world at Nintendo and the marketing world was, I don't know, maybe 50-50. It just was not male oriented. So no, it didn't cross my mind. So do you think having both women and men impacted you had a lot of women on your staff too, impacted the content?
It wasn't a thing that I thought about. I think we had almost like an equal split of male and female designers. But it wasn't something that, because everybody was confident in what they were doing. So, just hire people who could do a good job.
Yeah.
And everybody there was doing a good job. It didn't matter whether they were male or female. So it wasn't something that really crossed my mind until this guy brought it up.
No, I 100% agree.
I feel attacked somehow. I don't.
We all just love gaming, and really that was the base. And it didn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It was more like, do you love games? Do you love to play? And are you good at your job?
Yeah.
At the end, but I didn't feel anything about that. Yeah.
Are we going to pull questions? Because there's some people.
Yeah, we will, but we got some time.
All right.
We'll have plenty of time for questions. Going back to the digital or the physical art to the digital transition, Scott, I'd like to pick on you a little bit to talk about like the differences in your role, like as it went, because you started with traditional and sort of made that transition into digital.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's sort of what makes this panel a little bit unique. Is kind of Gail started strictly traditional, and then Kim kind of was strictly digital, and then you sit kind of in the middle there. And so I'd love to talk about that transition, because I think just looking at the audience, I think we probably have a pretty good split of kids that grew up with the digital era already and those that that started in traditional. So
Yeah, so when I started working at V-Design, working on the magazine.
can you stop for a minute and explain V-Design?
Oh, so V-Design was contracted by Nintendo to work on the magazine. It was I always thought it was an interesting arrangement.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I didn't really understand how like all the pieces fit. I just knew that, we were across the street from Nintendo. That was our little place. And whenever we needed to, work with Nintendo, we would walk across the street and work with the writers and all that kind of stuff. So, so V-Design was contracted by Nintendo to work on the magazine. And when I started in '93, it was all done on paper mechanicals. So we just did the design on these large sheets of paper, and it was old school, but just coming out of the Art Institute, which is basically a trade school for art, I had an understanding of all that, how that worked. But at the same time, they were training us, at the end of my stint at the Art Institute, they were training us with digital stuff. So it was like Photoshop 2.5, some really old stuff. So when I started at V-Design working on the magazine, doing the paper mechanicals, you're limited in what you can do creatively unless you want to take out the time to work on a piece of art to put in the article. And since, we have every designer had like 2 or 3 games to do a month, and they had to play the game and find all the great stuff to write about, the time was a precious thing. So after a while, I was like, why don't we have any computers in here? Why aren't we using computers to make any of these graphics? So we started getting computers slowly. And in the beginning, I think it was, if I remember, because it was a long time ago, it was just to do like bits and pieces of artwork. And then eventually we started realizing that it could speed us up in certain areas. And we were wondering, like, why aren't we doing the layout on a computer? And, you know, it just kind of evolved and grew from there. It kind of turned into a nightmare for me because I was the one who had to deal with all the computer problems because I was the one who suggested getting computers. So yeah, my role split from designer to designer and IT person. But it was fun, and we eventually, everything was done on computers. Even the map making went to computers, which made it a whole bunch easier to edit. Yeah, and that's when, you know, since we were going digital and we were exploring a lot of new software, we started using 3D and, you know, kind of trying to track what the games were looking like, you know? So the games are starting to look better, so we're like, well, can we make stuff, headlines or spot art that kind of reflected the game feel? So we started getting into like 3D programs and all kinds of crazy stuff just to try to capture the feel. But yeah, it was a very interesting process.
That's right. Like with Super Mario, when you guys worked on it, you were just like making 3D
Yeah, the
things.
3D maps.
Yeah, 3D maps in here. And it was revolutionary.
Yeah.
You know, it was like nobody had ever done this.
Well, and we couldn't do that because the old way, if you all have been to the museum and looked at, there's that map in there.
Dragon Warrior
And-
map.
Yeah, and the old way to do the map was you had this device, and on top of it was a 13-inch monitor, and on top of that was an SNES, or like the Game Boy was hooked up to it, and the video feed went into this device. And as you were playing the game, you'd get to the area where you didn't, you know, you need to take a picture of it, and you hit the button on this device, and it would print out a little picture. So you'd have these stack of pictures that you would have to cut up and glue all together. And sometimes, depending on the game, like the Game Boy games didn't have a save sometimes, and you had to get a certain area, and you had to die just to try to get. And the map would get thicker and thicker and thicker because you're laying over all these individual images on top of it, just trying to fill in that one spot. And it was infuriating sometimes. You'd sit there and you're playing, and all you need to do is just get a couple of screens just to fill in the map, right? And sometimes you'd be there late at night just trying to get it, and you'd hear people. We had a little room. It was like a little closet with like
Padded
four,
cell.
with 4 stations in there, and you would hear them, damn it! Just yelling because they just cannot get that one last image, you know?
Okay, so I want to jump in and say, to clarify the whole V-Design Workhouse relationship, the device, that's the magic of why you existed. Somehow they had figured out the device to take these shots and make the maps. And
I see. So they had the technology.
they had the technology even at the beginning.
Yeah, and digital maps took a while to get because at the time, we were all on Macs, and there wasn't a video interface to go from a console to a Mac. So we couldn't really capture it digitally for like a couple of years, and then someone made a device that had enough resolution in there. I think some of the devices that we looked at were like 480 by whatever. They were really dinky. But then we got one that would capture, you know, the actual screen size. And then we just used Photoshop and brought in all of the frames, and it made it so much easier. We can erase your character, we can erase him out, we can erase the UI, and it made the maps look super nice. Yeah.
I always feel like we're not going to have enough time, or that we have too much time, and then I end up not having enough time. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for audience questions. So the one thing that I kind of wanted to close on before we move to audience questions is talking about the contests, because that is consistently like what any time, like I go to Twitter and be like, hey, like what questions do you have for the panel? It's always like, tell us about the wacky contests, and like so. Gail, let's probably start with you. Can you talk a little bit like how that like conceptually started, and then just sort of like talk maybe a little bit about like the snowball of how crazy those contests got when you're giving away RoboCop cars and Bill and Ted's phone booth? Like,
I know.
how did it get there?
Why did they give that to us? But if you look at issue 1, I was just looking at it like you got 10 games of your choice, which seems like it's not that big of a prize. But so the Players Poll Contest in Japan, some of these magazines like Shonen Jump, etc., they have what called a bingo card, and you rate things, and that's how they determine kind of which comics, which manga are going to continue on, is by how popular it is based on the vote of the readers. Okay, so the idea was we should imitate that and find out which games the players were liking the most and ask other important survey questions. So that's where it came from. But in order to get people to send us this card, at the time, remember, you've got to like put it in the mail, we needed to entice them with a prize. So how'd the prizes get so exciting? Well, Nintendo Power, at the beginning, we said we didn't want any outside advertising. We didn't want people to be able to pay, because we didn't want the influence of, especially for game advertising, people wouldn't be able to buy that publicity. It had to be through their games being great. That would bring high satisfaction. But I buy into that as my mission statement, but I still wanted big prizes even if the game was crappy. And so people would, so things like Bill and Ted's phone booth, you know, in order to get basically a 2-page advertisement in Nintendo Power, they just offered us the world. So whether it was a RoboCop car, or like people went to France to go to F1 game, and so my husband is here. We were going to go to the Super Bowl. We gave away tickets to the Super Bowl, but then the Iraq-Kuwait war broke out, and we all got grounded at Nintendo, and we didn't get to go to the Super Bowl that year. And later, we went to a Super Bowl for the Seahawks, so that was more rewarding. But anyway, yeah, so it was crazy. The only one I went to was, most of them I didn't go. I went to the Ken Griffey Jr. one I hosted because it was in my hometown, and I got to bring my son, who is 35. He marks the beginning of my career shift to publications. So he got to go with me to the Ken Griffey Jr. thing, and that was fun. And I went and met DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, so Will Smith.
That girl. So I found that girl who won that, because she still has the script that he signed for her. She's very, very excited that she has the script.
Yes, that one was really fun for me, but people had all kinds of crazy questions. Probably the one negative one I can remember, some family, they emptied the minibar. That was, or people would, at the time there was such a thing as long distance. They'd get in their hotel room and they'd call everyone that they knew.
Oh, no.
You know, sometimes taking advantage. Kim said she went on one.
Oh, yeah, I think I went on the wave race one where we actually hosted it out here at Seafair. And oddly enough, a couple had won it. They were an elderly couple, and they'd won it through like a senior magazine. And so it was just really odd. But we took them out there, and we had a bunch of Nintendo people there, and we all had a great time at Seafair and watching the boats. But I was like, I had no idea they were featuring Nintendo Power contests in some kind of senior magazine. Right? Crazy.
I want to know that they were just like super into wave race.
It's one of those things where they have like a list of all the places where you can enter, and they probably saw the prizes were so good. They say, hey, here's one you should enter.
Right.
How funny. So I want to do some audience questions, and so I guess we'll have you tell us the question, and then just so that it's heard by the recording and everyone else, then I'll just repeat it back for the panel, and then we'll do that. So I saw you first.
Yeah, you bring up the crazy contest. I'm curious if you have any stories regarding the Mask 2 contest.
So the question is about the Mask 2 contest.
You know, I don't know, I read that today again also, that what do you do when you can't fulfill the contest as, get the prize as given? I don't remember what we did for the winner. I'm sure there was something that we did in the end. But yes, I know that it was not fulfilled.
I think I remember actually reading an article years ago where they found the contest winner and he had been given, like, I think a letter of apology and like a t-shirt.
Great.
One of 50 T-shirts for that issue.
Bitter, it really was wanted Mass 2, I guess.
You in the yellow jacket?
Oh.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could comment on this idea, we've all had that games were intentionally made hard and cryptic to encourage sales of Nintendo Power or
I love that.
The question is, were games made harder to promote sales of Nintendo Power magazine? Gail.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously that's hilarious, but yeah.
Orange.
Me?
Yeah.
I remember I was here last year and you talked about people would submit like fan art, right, for Nintendo Power, and apparently they got like hundreds of people sending in either like Mario decapitating Sonic or Sonic decapitating Mario. Did you end up bringing those this year?
No, I did not. I do have some unpublished envelope art that is pretty salacious.
I think this crowd can handle it.
I just have to framing those envelope frames are so expensive because there's so many of them. Blue.
So, Nintendo Power worked with a lot of Japanese artists in the past, oftentimes doing art in something of a different style from the original game. I'm thinking here like the really great art from the Dragon Quest guy, which had Katsuya Terada, but it was excellent art, but very different from Akira Toriyama's art. So what sort of back and forth was there for guidance between the American publication art wing and the Japanese artists in terms of this is kind of the vibe we're looking for, or do more like Toriyama or less like that, or that sort of thing?
So the question is about the difference in art direction between the American and Japanese arts.
Good question.
So I'm going to ask these guys about this too. First of all, the interesting thing about the art in Nintendo Power in general was when a licensee was submitting their game for approval, they, in their agreement with Nintendo, they agreed that Nintendo Power would have the game in advance. They knew that, and Nintendo for marketing purposes also would be able to use the game outside of their technical submission for testing. So we were very fortunate about that. And then did you guys, I suppose, had to contact the licensees sometimes and try to get art?
You got this?
Yeah, so that was a mixed bag. So, all the designers would get a bunch of games to do every month, and sometimes we would get assets for it, like the logo and game art and stuff. Sometimes we would just get a logo. Sometimes we wouldn't get anything. So we would have to make it up. And since, it was a month of production time until the next, basically redo.
So you were just a month behind on
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the next issue, yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of a gamble. So we had to find artists that were reliable and could kind of get it. And in terms of artists that were overseas, it was easier to work with artists that we'd worked with in the past that kind of knew the vibe, and we could easily translate that versus trying out new people. So after a while, we kind of created like this stable of contractors and artists that we would just rely on to create the art if we couldn't do it ourselves. And most of the time, we couldn't do it ourselves just because we were busy playing the game and doing the layouts and all that kind of stuff. So
I kind of remember you doing the art and bringing it to me sometimes.
sometimes, I mean, that was my favorite part, doing the art, because that's what I went to school for.
Yeah.
Woman in the black shirt?
Was there a group collaboration on the April Fool's jokes in Nintendo Power, or was it just like something somebody would slip in occasionally, like the Dragonite turning into Yoshi?
Do you remember the April Fool's jokes?
You know, I don't recall any specific jokes that I participated in, but I would encourage it.
That was the writers.
Yeah. The
Branching
writers.
out,
We had
writers branching out, yeah.
live to quip, quip to live. That was one of our mottos, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I'm kind of wondering, like, what was the criteria for evaluation for, like, something that hadn't been released yet, getting coverage in Nintendo Power? I just remember a lot of the games I liked got barely any or no coverage, and I'm still a little mad. Your Adventures in the Magic Kingdom thing was like 2 pages long. That game was a nightmare.
Yeah, Gail.
Okay, so.
Why'd you cover bad games, Gail?
All right, so I'm not to blame on what the rating was that was under consideration. So for that, you can thank people like Howard Phillips. So what his.
Throw him under the bus.
Yeah, what his real job at Nintendo was game analysis, and he also did early localization and naming of games, things like that. So he was part of originally the big three. They would rate the game on, I'm sure some of you have heard of this scale that Nintendo had. It looked like a spider web, and the more even the spider web is, the more balanced a game is. Anyway, we had several iterations of that, and different people that came and went that were part of that review. But a game would get rated, and then by that group, and then when we had our editorial meeting, when Howard was at Nintendo, he would participate, and we would talk about the games that were most highly rated, and those games scored the most pages. So if a game was extremely difficult and you could have used the support and the help, that it actually did not rate highly with the internal raters, it still wouldn't have gotten coverage. Might end up in Counselor's Corner if it got a lot of calls about it.
Can you just, next, because I'm curious, can we talk specifically about the covers, how the covers were chosen?
Yeah, generally, the game that was the highest rated was on the cover. I got accused that Capcom had more covers than Nintendo for a while, and like that I just liked Mega Man more than Mario or something. But the games that were rated the highest that month, almost always the month that we thought it was going to come out, and so you will end up with something where a cover game isn't very highly rated compared to another one because it was the pool was so small. Imagine that everybody wants their games to come out in November and December, so the January, February games kind of often suck. So
That's how you got Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt as a cover.
Relating to the covers, seeing the clean versions of all the elaborate cover artwork in the museum was rather incredible. I'm wondering, this is a question for the host, do you have any plans on selling or making art prints of those clean cover art, or would there be like weird rights litigation issues you have to deal with?
You are well. There are organizations. I believe that there are things that I could do well within my rights. There are organizations who would disagree with me and wouldn't have to be right in order to essentially bankrupt the museum. So generally, unless I got like if I, like, for instance, an art book, like, everyone in here has asked me at one point to do an art book, and I would love to do an art book, but, like, logistically, it would be very difficult, especially because also the rights holders gets really murky, because it's like, okay, this piece of art for, I don't know, Mickey's Magical Quest, right? That's a Nintendo-generated piece with a Disney intellectual property. Two of the most litigious, love them both, worked for one of them. Two of the most litigious entities on the planet. And so, like, it would just be, just to unwind that would be difficult. And then also just like, I have found many times people will default to no because it's too difficult to figure out whether or not there's a yes on the table, right? So that's usually the stipulations around doing things like prints, doing things like art books, which is why I love to spend my time showing you the work, because no one can stop me from doing that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very good.
Purple.
There were some cool prizes you could get for subscribing to Nintendo Power during certain months. I think like the Donkey Kong 64 banana controller and stuff like that. Where did the ideas for those come from, and what was the process like?
Sometimes it was opportunistic, like the Dragon Warrior cartridge. Sometimes, and by the way, to follow that up, I really wanted to do Super Mario Brothers, The Lost Levels. I had named that thing with after Howard showed me what happens after you finish the arcade game and do that last level. And I was shot down. It would have been a great way to retain all those people who just wanted a free game. But then later on, the technique that we used was to give a player's guide, because it was, it met the mission statement, and they're inexpensive to print as compared to the retail value. So, marketing teams would do it sometimes, internally we would think of something, but yeah, sometimes just opportunistic.
Probably 2 or 3 more. You holding up the 3, yeah, you.
Who's responsible for the Earthbound insert, and did you guys
Me. Me, and I'm sure that you know that some of you may have seen something where I've talked about it. It was me working with our agency, Nintendo. I keep saying Mr. Arakawa, but that's just who it is. He asked publications to do the player's guide and the deluxe package of that game and market the game. So yeah, the marketing agency that I had with This Game Stinks, I thought that we really thought it was fun, and that the target audience at the time, males, 12 to 16, would think it was funny, the scratch and sniff thing. We sat in a conference room, we sniffed all the stinky sniffs.
I mean, we didn't not think it was funny, but.
And I think that people are so bitter that the game didn't come out, that then they want to say it was because the marketing of that game made people then not buy it enough, and then blah, blah, blah. But there were a lot of localization issues with the other game, and because of like the disc system, that kind of thing, I've talked to Leslie Swan about this, who's the head of localization for many years, and it just the code, everything else to, I know there's a dedicated fan base that wants it, but you've only got so much resource to put toward all the games that you develop. And going back to recreate the wheel on that one just didn't happen.
And Nintendo Power, your team did the strategy guide for that too.
Right, and it was packed in.
Yeah.
It was a special type of box and a special type of campaign.
Probably have 2 more, probably. You in the black.
I have a question for the man in the white shirt. I'm sorry, I'm bad with names.
That's all right.
So when you started, you were pretty young, right?
Yeah.
And you said that you had 2 to 3 games that you got to just play for your job.
Yeah.
My question is, did it eventually get to the point where it was 2 or 3 games you had to play for your job? Maybe some of your friends that maybe had PlayStations and Xboxes, and you were kind of, did you feel like pigeonholed, like you were missing out on all these games your friends were talking about?
Did you hate the games you played?
So,
Okay.
That's reductive.
so we got a Japanese PlayStation when it came out, since my boss was from Japan, and we all loved playing video games. So we had a Japanese PlayStation, and we would come in early to work to play it. We also would play computer games early in the day, in the morning before work. So we loved playing video games. The reason I left was because after 5 years of being there, all the games are the same, really. There was pretty much just a formula people followed. It was easy to figure out where the secrets would be, where the hidden rooms, blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of got bored with it. I kind of got bored with playing video games, which sucked because I didn't play video games for the longest time after that. And then when I jumped back in, like all my skills were gone. Right? So now I can't play video games anymore. I just play role-playing games because they're just easy, right? But yeah, I did get tired of playing the same. I mean, yeah, it may have looked better, it may have looked nicer, but the core of it was the same as a video game that I might have played 2 months ago before, right? So I just wanted to keep it new and fresh, and it was. Things were getting new and fresh. Like the last system I was on when I was there was the N64, but it was just a skin. The game itself, like they were all kind of the same still, And yeah, maybe it was 3D like Turok. It was first person and stuff like that. But the overall like strategy of it was the same as every other game. So yeah, after a while I just got bored.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are at time. Thank you all so much for coming to the panel. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Did you know that the Interactive Art Collection is a 501c3 nonprofit organization? You can donate by visiting interactiveartcollection.org. All of your donations are tax deductible. You can also support our work on Patreon at patreon.com/gameartcollection.